After a Thanksgiving break, we are back here on Pulse of the Pack. This is 88.1 WKNC. Chris Lehman with you alongside Drew Blevins. Ben Hefner couldn't make it in tonight. Something about, I think their exams starting up soon. So
yeah, no big deal. Nothing big. Don't got to worry about that.
I think we'll excuse him this week, and I think he can take the break. I haven't heard from him about a prediction, which we'll get to later on in the show, but I haven't heard from him. We may just give him a break this week. We'll take a look at the predictions.
Yeah, we don't need to let him know there's a prediction at all. He's just too far ahead right now.
So, after last week, I guess technically last week with no show, we did not have a prediction, but we did the week before. It was the Syracuse football game. A win or a loss, that was worth 2 points. And then the number of turnovers that NC State was able to force against Syracuse. And the total number was 2. Ben guessed 2. He was right on the money, so he got all 4 points. That brought him up to 33. Now, you and I were both 1 off. You said 3, I said 1. And we both also called the win, so we got the 2 points. But we need to determine who is going to get that extra point. We're going to need a coin to do that.
I actually don't think I have a coin on.
I don't think I plan to bring a coin in. I think I forgot to bring a coin as well. I don't know. I don't know.
Chris.
I don't know. I'm trying to. We'll see. We'll come up with another way down the line and figure out how to do that.
There were 3 total turnovers that game.
There were 4. There were 4.
That is correct.
But we'll talk actually about the game that happened the weekend after the Syracuse game, one that I think had a less favorable outcome for NC State. That was the North Carolina game. That's what we're going to talk about here in our first segment, and it really was just a tale of the first quarter because the Tar Heels come out and just blow NC State out of the water. Last year, NC State wins 35-7. That's the score in favor of the Tar Heels after 15 minutes in this one. Drew, it was just a bloodbath.
It was ugly. I mean, there's no other way to put it. 5 touchdowns on 5 straight drives, and you look at it, their entirety of their offense was shown in full force in the first 15 minutes of that football game. And it's frustrating because there really was no answer. I think NC State really got the wind knocked out of their sails once they went down 28-7, and what made it even worse is there was no comeback effort once Jacoby Brissett threw the pick, and that ended up setting up a first and goal for Carolina that they punched in to make it 35-7. I still like what Luke DeCock said, and he posted this to Twitter, News and Observer writer, and he goes, the 28-point lead seemed like a whole lot bigger than it was, and when NC State was able to cut it back down to within 2 scores, he goes, that seemed like a whole lot smaller than it was. The fact of the matter is, Carolina dominated the first quarter. There's no question about that. NC State just didn't have enough resiliency in the first 15 minutes. If they had scored even another touchdown in that first quarter, I think you really look at a change in strategies. You go down the stretch. I think you're not feeling so much pressure to start creating some early onside kicks. You're not necessarily in the threat to have to get points on every single drive, and I think that would have allowed NC State to sort of sit back and relax and assess the game better. But as it stood, North Carolina won the game in 15 minutes. It's just plain and simple.
The thing here that just kind of baffles me is this is North Carolina. Haven't lost an ACC game, haven't lost since the first week of the season. This is the team that you want to beat the most out of any team on your schedule, and you come out and lay an egg like that in the first quarter of the game. How you don't show up prepared for that game. I mean, 5 drives, 5 touchdowns for North Carolina, 323 total yards in the first quarter. That is just awful by NC State's defense, and part of it, I will say, is on the offense because they didn't move the ball and give their defense any rest, but it just looked like nobody on this team showed up to play in this game at the start.
Well, nobody wanted to make a play. I think it honestly does come down to one play, and the thing that rips everybody's heart out is the fact that NC State stopped Carolina on 3rd down, stopped them short. Nobody remembers that because there was a flag thrown from 30 yards away for a late hit that was the second controversial call in that quarter, regardless of what you think of the officiating through the rest of the football game. Upon further review, I could see where that would be construed as a late hit. I don't necessarily disagree with that call, but it's a tough one to swallow, and one Riley Nicholson will tell you that he needs to have back, that he needs to hold up on, because it was one of those things where the Carolina player, I believe it was Elijah Hood, if I'm not mistaken, had one foot that was on the stripe, half of it out of bounds, half of it inbounds, and you want to make sure you force him out before he gets the extra 2 yards. NC State, from that moment forward, had no tenacity. There was no toughness there. And you're right. I mean, the fact of the matter is, once Carolina got going, they couldn't be stopped. It was like trying to stop a train, and NC State just couldn't do it. Now, what's worse is the fact that we talked about the weakness of the secondary. That's sort of been our theme, our MO, when we're ragging on the defense really all season long. And it wasn't the secondary that played poorly that was so noticeable this time. It was the front seven, because T.J. Logan gashes up the middle for a long touchdown run. Elijah Hood ran all over the blessed football field, and nobody was able to stop him. And while Elijah Hood and T.J. Logan are good backs, again, they're not Dalvin Cook, they're not Wayne Gallman, they're not the best backs in the ACC, and there was no stopping them. I mean, the stat stands at the end of the football game. North Carolina has 374 rush yards, and they've got a couple running backs who go over 175. That's just inexcusable, and it all comes down to the rush defense for me. If that was taken out of the football game, you still look, Marquise Williams does throw an interception. The turnovers were created. The defense did their job later on, but the fact was, if Carolina ever needed to get a big play, all they had to do was put the ball on the ground.
Yeah, and part of that, I think if you look, a lot of those longer running plays, or at least a couple of them, came later on in that quarter when I think that defense has started to be worn down, and that's just great planning by North Carolina and knowing what to do. And that's something that I've kind of had a problem with in the last few games, most noticeably once Matt Days goes out, is as NC State, your first-string running back to start the year, Shadrack Thornton, comes off a suspension, gets suspended and kicked off the team, down to your second, almost like you're running a half-string because Matt Days plays a lot whether or not Shadrack Thornton's there. Then he gets hurt. Then you're down to your third-string, true freshman running backs who have no experience yet, and you're still trying to run the ball a lot. That I don't understand. To me, that's not putting your team in a position to succeed. You have a good quarterback, one that you can trust with the ball in his hands, and Jacoby Brissett. Most of the time, he's going to make the right decision. That's why NC State, as a team, has only thrown 4 interceptions this year, and I believe only 3 of them are Jacoby Brissett's, because he makes good decisions. I don't understand why you don't leave the ball in his hands more and leave it up to him.
Well, to go back to your point about Shadrack and Matt Days, now you see the importance of keeping your running back on the football team. And regardless of whether your moral philosophy says they should have kept him off or they should have kept him on, the fact of the matter is he's gone, and now you see this is the worst-case scenario that could have happened because there is no experienced running back in that backfield. And everybody was saying, it's okay, he was a troublemaker to begin with, and we've got Matt Days. Well, you take him out, and you essentially nullify the running game because all year long jet sweeps just haven't worked to the advantage. Nyheim Hines, I think, will be a threat on that play a little bit later on in his career once he gets a little bit bigger, a little bit faster, but not right now. Jacoby Brissett played a decent football game. Over 100 yards rushing, throws for 206 passing yards, but the reason that you can't always rely on him comes down to receiving corps once again. And yes, he's been finding his receivers, but there is no go-to guy, I don't think. I have always wished that even going back to the opening of ACC play against Louisville and Virginia Tech, that Dave Doran and Matt Canada had opted to go to the tight ends a little bit more, to start using David Gringe and Cole Cook. Maurice Trowell comes in and plays well down the stretch from the Wake Forest game on. The fact is, if those receivers had been a little bit more dominant, you might look at NC State becoming a more one-dimensional passing game offense. I didn't think Carolina's secondary played particularly well. I didn't think they played poorly, but the thing is, NC State moved the football well offensively after about the first 10 minutes of that football game. And once they got inside the red zone, everything died. And I mean everything died, from the running game to the passing game. Again, do you look at the officiating as a cause of the loss? No. Did it go NC State's way? No. NC State scores a late fourth-quarter touchdown that would have been tremendous for the Wolfpack's momentum because it would have cut it back down more toward a one-score game. It would have taken a touchdown and an extra point to tie the football game, but it's called back on a quote-unquote illegal block in the back that, again, was questionable. And NC State was not able to overcome those calls. Gene Chizik's defense in North Carolina prides themselves on the Chizik red zone, which is the 13-yard line and back to the goal line. And once NC State got in that zone, North Carolina dominated the line of scrimmage, and NC State wasn't able to finish by putting it in those last 10 yards of the football field. That hurt them more than anything. I mean, you look, NC State does have 308 rushing yards. Running back by committee, I think, operated fairly well. Not great, but enough to get you by to supplement the passing game. Jacoby Brissett, for the first time all season, starts making plays with his feet, and I thought that was a tremendous addition to the effort to try to come back and win this football game. But nonetheless, this is a 100-yard football field, and if you're only treating it like it's 85 to 90 yards, you're not going to put many balls in the end zone. And you look, you turn around these field goals that you had to kick. If you want to go for it on fourth down, which is what I would have done in a couple of those situations, fine, so be it. And you look, I mean, at the end of the day, you only lost by 11 points. If you're taking a few more risks and if you're able to pound through and find a way to score the football, I think you're looking at a different result in this football game.
Yeah, and for a little bit of a different reason, I agree that NC State they didn't show up for this game, it didn't seem like. From just about the kick, it seemed like Carolina's ball game the whole way. I mean, you could feel it in there. The energy was gone after about 5 minutes, and North Carolina had, I believe, 3 scores already at that point. And at that point, there is no getting back into that football game. It was over from about 5 minutes in on, and that's the thing that I just can't get past. This is the game you've been watching, waiting for the entire season. It's a chance to knock North Carolina out of any chance of going to the college football playoff, ruin that hope for them, and mess up their season a little bit, and you just show up flat. That is what I don't understand at all.
Well, and yeah, you're absolutely right. And even to reaffirm your point, this is how North Carolina's first quarter went. First drive, 3 first downs, touchdown. NC State, first drive, 1 first down, punt. Carolina gets the ball, 3 first downs, touchdown. NC State goes down, scores their only touchdown of the quarter. Then Carolina absolutely dominates because 4 plays, touchdown. Defense forces a 3 and out. 2 first downs, touchdown. Turnover, another 3 plays, touchdown. It was boom, 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 boom. I think that what you're starting to see is how much Carolina's speed on offense affected NC State. And they've played a couple of tempo teams, but nothing like this. Carolina is fast getting to the line of scrimmage. They're fast off the line of scrimmage. The defensive line got absolutely 0 penetration back toward Marquise Williams, back toward that offensive backfield. And looking up from the press box, it looked like Carolina may have committed a couple of holding fouls, but nothing that goes outside the course of the game. I know that's something that I've heard, that there should have been a holding called in the first quarter more than there was. I believe that there was 1 penalty call the entire first quarter, 2, both of them against NC State. Again, I do want to focus on the officiating a little bit because I think it had a little bit of a play, and I think more so than anything, it didn't affect the outcome of the game, but it affected NC State being able to get their psyche back into the football game. Because if you look at it, you've got an illegal low block that ends up forcing NC State back on their opening drive that scores, their second drive of the football game, and then you get the late hit on Riley Nicholson in that first quarter. And if you take away that late hit, you've got half the quarter to go, and I fully believe that NC State could have turned it around, and you'd be looking at a 21-14 game, a 28-14 game at worst, and I think that's where everything starts. But, I mean, what it comes down to is now we've seen an NC State team for 4 out of the last 5 games that has come out not ready to play at some point in the football game. And if this is something they're going to do in the bowl game against a team like Navy, where you're not going to get the ball a lot, and Navy, of course, is not the official opponent yet, but that's where most projections have them going, Northrop Grumman Military Bowl, to play Navy. But when you're playing a team with a triple option, you don't get the ball often, and your defense is going to have to be able to make stops. And if you can't do either of those things, you might as well write it off as a loss automatically. NC State has to find a way, as a football team, as a football program, to come out and play a 60-minute effort. I really can't recall a game this season where there's been a full 60-minute effort, and that's what it all boils down to for me. It just, wherever those gaps come, it seems like it hurts NC State, and it's always too much to overcome.
Well, with that said, NC State sits 7-5, 3-5 in the conference. They're going to a bowl game, and we'll talk more about that in our next segment after the commercial break we have coming up. But I want to get final thoughts on the season, and to me, it's all said in that conference record. NC State went 4-0 out of conference. They go 3-5 in conference. That is just unacceptable. You have to win more games in the ACC. It's a Power 5 conference, yes, but it's not one of the best Power 5 conferences when it comes to football. You're definitely looking at least the SEC and the Big Ten, possibly the Big 12 as well, as being better football conferences. So you have to win games in conference, and they're not. To me, it's either beef up and win games in non-conference, or you've got to find a way to win your conference games if you want to find a better record, because it's right now that's what it is.
The fact of the matter is not only does NC State play in the ACC and is not able to win conference games, but every year in, year out, they've got to play the best teams of the ACC consistently, Clemson and Florida State. And until you're able to beat one of those teams, possibly both of those teams, you're just not going to get anywhere. There is no upward mobility because right now that's the top of the class system in the ACC. I don't know what the problem is. I couldn't tell you what it is. I think that there are some strategic issues. I think there's some coaching issues. I think there's some personnel issues that still carry over. But this is Dave Doran's third year. And once it rolls around, as the calendar clocks over into 2016, that's a tough schedule to play. And this is Dave Doran's proving year coming up. He's going to have Jalen McClellan at quarterback. That's his guy. He's got his guys on the football field for the most part. And you've got to play at East Carolina, and you have to play at home against a ranked Notre Dame team and Brian Kelly. Not to mention, you're going to have to go on the road to play Clemson, on the road to play Carolina, and you have to host Florida State here. That's not a friendly schedule. Is it a successful season? By record, yes. 7-5 is not bad. But as an NC State fan and as an analyst, I get very, very tired of saying it's a good season for NC State. It has been a very long time since I've been able to objectively look at the body of work the Wolfpack have put in and say, that's a good season. That's a problem to me, because if that's a good season for NC State, well, what's a good season? I projected the Wolfpack to go 9-3 this year. And if you look back to the beginning of the season, a win against Virginia Tech, a win against Louisville, and they're there. But the fact is there is some sort of breakdown in personnel, poor communication, poor coaching, whatever it may be, that is preventing them from going from having a good season for NC State to having a good season. And they need to be able to make that jump in the very near future.
All right, well, that's going to wrap up our talk about North Carolina and at the end of this regular season. We're going to talk about bowl games and where NC State might end up, as well as a little bit of men's basketball coming your way on the other side of this break here on Pulse of the Pack on 88.1 WKNC. We are back here on Pulse of the Pack, 88.1 WKNC, up in Witherspoon on the campus of NC State University. Chris Lehman and Drew Blevins with you. Ben Hefner not able to make it in tonight, but we send him our best. He is doing schoolwork for the end of the semester. Right now we're talking, though, about NC State football. Just to run through some quick stats here that NC State has at the end of the season. As a team, 411.9 yards a game on offense, 201.5 of those about coming on the ground, 210.5 coming through the air, a 42% third down conversion, not too bad. The thing that really I look at as the big problem here, 53.1 yards of penalties a game. They're setting themselves back over half a football field. That just can't happen.
Well, what was the stat against Carolina? 7 penalties for 72 yards. That's inexcusable. And that's truly a personnel issue, because you can coach players and you can tell them, hold back, hold back. Well, that's great, because when you get into the heat of a moment, you and I both know from being athletes ourselves that when you get in the heat of the moment, anything can happen. You just got to be able to hold back on the reins a little bit, because you're giving up half the field in penalties per game, and that's just inexcusable. You got to be able to hold back.
Well, if you take a look down their schedule, too, we already talked about it. Non-conference, they swept through. They beat Troy, then Eastern Kentucky, 2 convincing home wins. They go on the road and blow out Old Dominion and South Alabama. So they were looking good there, and it looked like they might be a team that can make a run at an ACC title game. Then you get into conference schedule. Play Louisville at home, lose by a touchdown in a very sloppy game. Then you go up to Virginia Tech, give up a big second quarter, 21 points, lose that game as well. Then you play Wake Forest, get a little break, take a win there, but then you've got Clemson and Florida State in 2 of your next 3 games. Those are both losses. And then, of course, North Carolina at the end of the season, another loss, and they just continue to pile up, and you really see the importance of being ready for a schedule like that, and NC State wasn't.
You see the importance of being ready, and you see the importance of being ready to play in any given field condition. You talked about the Louisville game, sloppy game. sloppy conditions. That was the quote-unquote monsoon game. But what strikes me the most is that there are these moments every season for NC State that just seem to define the season and what it was, where they're so close, they're on the precipice of doing something really special, and then they fumble it. And I think this year you go back to that Louisville game, and it's, who was it? Wide receiver, I can see him right now. It wasn't Jonathan Alston. It was
Ramos,
Jermichael Ramos. Jermichael Ramos catches a lob pass, and he has nothing but green in front of him. He's running into a wide-open end zone, and he's caught from behind, stripped, turnover. Whereas if he scores that touchdown, NC State's going to win the football game 21-20, but he doesn't, and NC State loses by 7 instead. That's the play of the season for me, because that's what happened every single time. NC State went up 10-0 on Virginia Tech, loses the football game. NC State goes up 17-7 against Florida State, loses the football game. NC State stays close with Clemson, and you thought maybe there's a chance they're going to eke ahead, and they did toward the end of the second half, lost the football game. Those are just those moments that you see that NC State can't overcome. And I think the theme as you move forward is you've got to be resilient. You've got to find a way that when you're down, dig deep, gut check time, and find a way to come out on top. It doesn't have to be pretty. I guarantee you that out of this campus of 35,000 plus students, there is no one who cares how you win so much as you win. And that's just the fact of the matter. And NC State didn't win.
Well, what we want to look at now here is where NC State might wind up, and I've looked at a couple of different bowl projections to see, and there, from what I've seen, about 4 different places that people have NC State ending up. Whether or not you agree with all of them, that's another thing. One of them, the Independence Bowl in Shreveport, Louisiana, against Kentucky. Also looking at the Military Bowl up in Annapolis at the home of Navy against Navy. You talked about that one. That could be a tough one for NC State. Those were the 2 ESPN projections I saw on Yahoo. And this is one that baffled you and has me a little bit puzzled, is the Belk Bowl against Arkansas. I think NC State may be a little weak to play in that Belk Bowl, but that's another one. And the final one that to me almost came out of left field, was the Sun Bowl. That was the Sports Illustrated.
That was the one that really made me laugh.
The Sun Bowl against Utah in El Paso. But those are what I'm seeing. What are your thoughts, and where do you think NC State might wind up?
Well, I think before I give my thoughts, it's important to realize that NC State's bowl future will be set in stone on Sunday, and that's after North Carolina plays Clemson in the ACC championship game. Because that game, even though it may not seem like it, and though NC State needs no other reason to pull against North Carolina, I mean, Clemson needs to win this football game for NC State to get a good bowl game. Because the fact is, Clemson wins, are going to college football playoff. That puts North Carolina in one of those Tier 1 New Year's 6 style bowl games. Even though right now ESPN has Florida State going to the Peach Bowl, where North Carolina statistically should be going. That's interesting. But what it stands out is the top 3 teams are going to be somewhere dispersed between the Peach Bowl, the Russell Athletic, and probably the college football playoff if Clemson wins. If Carolina wins, all sort of stays the same if they make the playoff, which I don't think they will. If they don't, they go to the Peach Bowl. Florida State gets knocked down somewhere, and Clemson's going to get that Peach Fiesta, Russell Athletic Bowl instead. What that does to NC State is that sets them up in the worst possible place they could be. Because with the way the bowl system is done now, you have Tier 1, where the top statistic teams go, and the Tier 2, where the bottom statistics teams go, they're still bowl eligible. NC State's 7-5 overall. If they had gotten the win against North Carolina, or really any other win throughout the course of the season, they're 8-4. That puts them in a Tier 1 bowl position, as that puts them at 4-4 in conference. What surprises me is that the more and more I look at it, NC State is not so much of an outside shot to the Belk Bowl as I initially thought. What is holding them back from getting that bid is the fact they have a losing record in conference. Virginia Tech beat them in conference. Virginia Tech is 6-6, 1 game less overall, but they have a 4-4 conference record. They're the ones slated to go to the Belk Bowl. So then NC State slides down to the Military Bowl or the Independence Bowl. I don't think they're going to end up going to Shreveport, because I don't think that's a team that anybody in Shreveport would like to see down there. It's a little bit farther for NC State fans to travel. And it's not really a good matchup regardless of who you put down there, because it's going to be a weak SEC team. The SEC team is really who the Shreveport Independence Bowl is trying to draw. That puts you in the Military Bowl. And I think that's where NC State ultimately is going to end up falling. That is the worst matchup NC State could get because it's playing against Navy. Let me explain a little bit about Navy. Navy's a 2-loss team this year. They should have beaten Houston, and they would have been thrown up in at least a dark horse contender to get into a New Year's Six bowl game. Notre Dame is going to take it from them as part of that exclusive 5, but nonetheless, that's a good football team, and they run the triple option. And we all remember how NC State fared the last time they faced the triple option, getting smothered on homecoming by Georgia Tech. That defense isn't ready for that. That will be a Navy win all day long, and that's considering the fact that NC State will have more rest because Navy has to play Army in a couple of weeks in arguably the biggest rivalry game in all of college football. But as it stands, now you're starting to see the reason why you need to go at least 500 in conference because, honestly, a Belk Bowl matchup against an SEC team, even if it is an Arkansas, a Kentucky, even a Texas A&M, I think State could be competitive in that football game, and that is a much better resume win moving forward to get better scheduling teams as you go down the stretch. If you beat Navy, great, so be it, but if you lose to Navy, they're now an AAC team. That's just not pretty, especially when you consider that NC State has not lost to Navy in quite a while, and once again, you see NC State is unable to play defense against the triple option. So it's a dangerous bowl game, one that, of course, Dave Dorn and staff will take seriously, but it's an interesting juxtaposition. Personally, I think they're going to the Military Bowl to play Navy.
And you've talked about a lot of it sounds like NC State's not going to end up in a good position, but I want to look at some of the places NC State could end up where they could end up in a successful position. And ironically, it seems like that would be against an SEC team. So the Belk Bowl or down in Shreveport for the Independence Bowl, and I'm not sure which one would work out better for NC State. Right now, I feel like the Belk Bowl would be their best option in Charlotte. It's close to home. I think that's somewhere they're familiar with, somewhere a lot of them are from. I think that would be a good place for NC State to play. I think that's the best place for them to end up right now, but it doesn't look too likely.
No, it doesn't look too likely. If they were, the Belk Bowl is probably going to end up losing a little bit of money, which we all know that bowl games are in it for the cash because that's the sponsorships and everything, and the TV broadcast rights. If you want to entertain the idea of getting an SEC team, this is the breakdown you're looking at. For the Belk Bowl, you're probably going to get either LSU or Texas A&M. If you look at the Independence Bowl, you're probably going to get Mississippi State. Auburn is an outside shot. Georgia is an outside shot. I think Georgia's going to go a little bit higher. And perhaps Kentucky, who is that weird little bubble team because they're 5-7 and technically non-bowl eligible, but because not enough team went 6-6, they're going to slide into a bowl game as it is. And I see you shaking your head. That's a conversation for another day, though. The Texas A&M Mississippi State matchup, if you get to play one of those teams, that's big. Because keep in mind, NC State does have a season series home and home coming up with Mississippi State down the road 2020 and 2021, I believe, are the years on that. So it's interesting because this would send a message. This would legitimize the NC State program. This would legitimize the ACC. But
if they win.
If they
That's
win.
An if.
Well, not necessarily if you win. If you're competitive.
Yes.
If you lose that game by a field goal or even a touchdown, I'd say, and you're competitive, that legitimizes the ACC even more. The fact of the matter is, regardless of where you go, you're going to play a tough game. And that even extends to playing a team like Navy. You're going to have to come out ready to play. You're going to have to treat this postseason game very, very seriously because I do think it ultimately puts an exclamation point or a period at the end of your season. And you got to go out, and it's always nice to have another trophy over in the Murphy Center.
Well, they've got a little bit of time before they have to play that game. They'll find out where they're going on Sunday after all the conference championship games. Well, there is a team, though, that will be playing during that period, and that will be the men's basketball team. Little bit of a tough start for this team, although I don't think it's as bad as people think it is. They sit right now 4-3. The way that this schedule has patterned out, actually, it's loss, win-win, loss, win-win, loss for the Wolfpack. And I want to take a look at 3 of the games that they've had in the last couple of weeks. 2 of them are losses. One of them is a pretty big win, in my opinion, against the number 22 LSU team. Go figure, that's the team that NC State comes away with the win against after what happened last year. The first one I want to look at, though, is the Arizona State game. That was the night before in the Legends Classic tournament against against the Sun Devils before the LSU game. They lose that one 76-79, a really close one, but they can't quite pull it out. Is that the youthfulness in this team coming out here early in the season?
That's the youthfulness of the team. That's a lot of things. Arizona State is probably going to slide into the NCAA tournament, in my opinion, because they have a revamped coaching staff. Herb Sendek's out of there. You've got Bobby Hurley there now. And believe me, Bobby Hurley wanted nothing more than to come back and beat an old ACC rival. And he did it. NC State stayed close. I mean, they gave a valiant effort. I was, for the most part, happy with the way they played that basketball game. But what stands is the fact that you just didn't get the result that you needed to get against the Sun Devils. And that's the tale of the tape. It comes down to a last-second shot. You get a good inbound play. You get it to Kat Barber. Stop right there. I think that's the problem. And I think that's the problem all season. Kat Barber is a good basketball player, but once again, we're going to tag that. He's a good basketball player for NC State. And thus far, he's been the go-to guy, and I'm not buying him yet. I don't think that he can be the single guy to carry the team because he's just not a TJ Warren. He's not a Julius Hodge. He's not an Engen Atzer even, and that goes back into the mid-2000s when NC State basketball was the laughingstock of the Triangle. This is a Wolfpack team that could be competitive if they shape up. Yes, it is very tough when you have Terry Henderson, who's going to be a night-in, night-out starter, go out in Game 1 of the season. There's no doubt. Yes, you're going to have a little bit of a sting carryover because of that. Maverick Rowan stepped up, and he's starting to play a role now. I've been very, very impressed with Caleb Martin because it looks like if NC State is going to have a three-ball game, it's going to have to start with him. Kat Barber, right now, I'm not seeing the speed that I saw at the end of last year. I'm not seeing good decision-making, and what's worst of all is I'm seeing a lot of hesitation on the floor from him. I know we're talking about the Arizona State game, but the game I attended last night, the Michigan game, so many times he's got the ball in his hands in space and he stands still. And when your point guard stands still, everybody else on the floor should be moving. When he stands still, everybody stands still. And when you're that much of a leader on the basketball team, you've got to make plays. I don't care if you turn the ball over a couple times if it's because you made a bad decision. At least you're being decisive. Making decisions, making right decisions can be corrected. Being indecisive can't. That's an instinct. And he's the guy they got the ball to in that Arizona State game. They didn't get to a three-point shooter. They got it to Kat. And he jacks up this shot that is off the mark, and they lose in a tournament that, honestly, they probably should have been able to come away with a couple wins and the trophy with, and they just didn't do it.
But here's the thing that really kind of stands out to me right now is I want to move on, first of all, to the LSU game because I think at least NC State in both of those games played fairly well. You look at the shooting percentages in both those games against Arizona State, almost a 45% field goal percentage, right around 40 against LSU. Those are both pretty good numbers. Same with the three-point field goals, about 31% against Arizona State, up at 35% against LSU. That's a very good number. And then the big surprise was almost 80% from the free throw line in that game against LSU. That was big in a game that ends up going to overtime.
Yep.
That is huge for NC State to shoot that well from the line because that really was a big, big difference in that game. LSU did not shoot well from the line, and NC State out-rebounded them big time. That, to me, was the best game NC State has played this year. But then you turn around and, again, like you talked about last night, NC State just looked horrible last night. I mean, I believe it was the beginning of the second half or end of the first half when Michigan loses their starting point guard. That gives you so much time, and NC State still couldn't come all the way back. An abysmal 32.8% from the field, just 23.5% from behind the arc, and an okay free throw percentage for NC State, not really for any other team that wants to be a big contender for a national championship, 70.8% from the charity stripe. They did out-rebound Michigan, but I heard it commented many times about last night's game that Michigan really was very bad on the board, so it wasn't necessarily a product of NC State just being a better team.
And Michigan is a speed team. They're not a size team, so that explains it directly. And the fact of the matter is John Beilein really out-coached Mark Gottfried. I'm a firm believer that you're absolutely right. The best game we've seen so far this season especially if you look at it through the lens of the non-conference schedule, is the game against LSU. But you also have to realize that win loses a whole lot of stock because the Tigers are on a 3-game losing streak right now. And they had just lost to Marquette the night before. So while they are technically still ranked because NCAA basketball doesn't do weekly ranking with daily rankings, they do weekly rankings, they're not really a ranked win because they were so low that any loss is going to knock them out automatically. NC State beats them. They beat Ben Simmons, who has been very good, considered possibility to be the top draft pick in the NBA once we get around into that time frame. I mean, that's a good effort. That's the one you want to duplicate. And you play against a Michigan team who, yes, is good, but not ranked good. They're mirroring your record. They're 4-2 coming into that basketball game as well. And they were flat. It was bad. It was not entertaining. It was slow. It was forced. There was no reason that NC State shouldn't have lost that game by double digits. Michigan shoots well from behind the arc. That's about all they do. And they run this one simple pick-and-roll play that NC State couldn't defend. They're getting the ball inside to Wagner, and he's putting it in. And if not, it's going out to LeVert or Robinson. And that's their offense. That's what they have to work with. They don't have Trey Burke and Hardaway anymore. It's not the national championship team. This isn't rocket science. It's basketball. And the fact is, regardless, NC State would not be able to compete. And they didn't. I think Mark Gottfried has a very tough task this year because he doesn't have a lot to work with, and you've got to find a way to make it work. There's no depth. That's the biggest problem. There's no depth, and as a result, there's no speed because you can't go out and just go full force in the first half and get out to a big lead, because if you do, you're going to be tired and you're going to allow other teams to gain momentum in the second half. Players that disappointed me last night, even though Barber had 16 points, he still only shoots 6 for 13, misses his 1 3-point attempt, 4 for 4 from the free throw line, which is great. You're going to need a consistent free throw shooter. But again, I'm not seeing the decisiveness. I'm not seeing his talent as a point guard. I wish he would drive the ball more. I wish that he would step up and fill the shoes as a leader that Mark Gottfried is asking him to be, and I'm just not seeing it. I look at B.J. Anya. We know B.J. Anya is not necessarily known for his offense, even though he does get 9 points and shoots 4 for 5 from the field. I thought he did very well in that regard. But the fact was, big man was getting fouled, and he only goes 1 for 6 from the line. No, he's not going to be the guy that you want to put your house on from the free throw line. But 1 for 6, and you're a Division I ACC basketball? I mean, come on. Some of them weren't even close. You've got to be able, if you're BJ Anya, I'm not saying make 75%. I'm saying make 50%. Just 2 more points. Contribute to the effort from the stripe. Caleb Martin doesn't escape my wrath either. He's the floor's leading scorer all night long. 3 for 9 from behind the arc. 5 for 12 shooting. NC State has gotten to find a way to make buckets. And that's what it comes down to for me. I don't really care if you're not going to be able to be great on defense. I think NC State gave a decent defensive effort last night. Wasn't great, but it wasn't terrible. If you can score the basketball, you're going to keep yourselves in games. Because I think you can work on defense and getting stops. Scoring the basketball is something you learn from the day you start playing the sport. You learn it in whatever youth league. Drive the basket. Lay it up off the glass. Find a way to force the ball into the bucket. NC State doesn't do it. 33% from the field wins you exactly 0 basketball games in this conference. It wins you exactly 0 basketball games when you're playing Division I basketball. That's inexcusable. That's something that has to change. I don't know who it starts with, but somebody's going to have to be a consistent scorer. Somebody's going to have to get behind that leader, and then we can start moving forward. But as it stands right now, the basketball team that came out last night against Michigan is going to be completely and totally unsuccessful, and you can kiss any postseason hope goodbye.
Well, with that, we're going to take a look at who NC State has coming up next. Should be a pretty easy task, and that is our prediction for this week. It is the men's basketball game against Bucknell. That will be a noon tip-off on Saturday. We're going to go with a win or a loss, of course, for the 2 points, and for the bonus 2 or 1 point, you have field goal percentage for NC State, because that has, or at least last night, was a big problem for NC State. So what do you have for us, Drew?
Well, you look at Bucknell, and they are actually in action right now, taking on the Columbia Lions. Right now, they're holding a record of 2-3, depending on how they do tonight. This is a team that has been upset-prone in the past, which is worrisome. And all of their games, they have played close. if there's any team on their non-conference schedule that they're going to be able to upset, it's going to be NC State. But I think when you take into account that the Wolfpack played so poorly against Michigan, I think this team is going to have to find a way to rebound onto themselves, pick themselves up, and find a way to win this basketball game. And as a result, I am going to take the Wolfpack in this one. And the other one was rebounding, I believe it was.
Field goal percentage.
Field goal percentage. You know, I'm not even so sure if NC State is going to be able to shoot anywhere over or near 60% all season. I'm going to go low once again. It's not going to be a pretty ball game. I'm going 43%.
Wow. I'm going to actually go a little bit lower than that because NC State, I think, has really been struggling. We'll see what they're able to do. I'm going to go with 40%, but I still think NC State comes out with a win. They have a little bit of time off. They've got plenty of time to look at tape, figure out what they're doing wrong, and fix it before they play a team that I think it's very easy to tell is not as good as Michigan. So I think they'll be all right in that game, but there are plenty of games down the line for them, and we will have time for that later. But now we're going to take our second break. When we return, talk a little bit about women's basketball, also a little bit about the NC State hockey team, here on Pulse of the Pack on 88.1 WKNC. We are back here on Pulse of the Pack. This is 88.1 WKNC in Raleigh, talking NC State athletics. Chris Lehman, Drew Blevins with you. Ben Hefner, not along with us tonight, but he'll be back later on. We've been talking about NC State football and a little bit of basketball, and both of those have been a little bit of sour subjects if you're an NC State fan. Both of them struggling a little bit, but couple of sports doing pretty well here on campus. Women's basketball off to a great start. They sit at 6-1 right now. The only loss came against a ranked team, Seton Hall. They lost by 3 in that game in the Cancun Challenge. They had an 8-0 run that pulled them within 2 points with 2 minutes left, but they couldn't quite get over that last hill, and they ended up falling by 3 in that one, but not a bad effort. And this team really has looked pretty good, considering they didn't necessarily look like they would have a great season coming into it.
I like this team. I really do. And I know we're not in the conference schedule yet, but I do think this NC State team could manage to make a little bit of noise. And yes, they're going to have some very tough opponents as they move into the ACC. Number 14, Duke. You've got North Carolina. Number 3, Notre Dame on the road. Number 20, Syracuse at home. 13, Florida State at home. A lot of those big games come at home. And I know that you're not playing at home because you do have to play a lot of those games at Broughton High School, but I think that helps NC State. And I do think they could be a little bit of a dark horse to do something in the ACC. Of course, it's really not going to matter, just as is the nature of women's basketball, because it still falls into UConn, Baylor, and Tennessee, and Notre Dame, and all of those schools, and it's going to be tough to beat those teams, but I think NC State could be very competitive. I mean, look at them. It's really simply stated. They're winning basketball games, and the one they didn't win, they were competitive. I mean, they hang with number 25, and they hang tough. And honestly, you wonder, does travel play a little bit of a factor in that game because it's the opener in the Cancun Challenge? They come back and play UAB and handle them fairly soundly.
Not a very good performance, though, if you look at that. Just 37% from the field, 30% from behind the arc, and 55% from the line.
56, though. I mean, and a lot of that's going to come on free throws as you head down the stretch for sure, but they're winning basketball games, and I don't think that you really can have too much room to complain with a 6-1 team, especially when you consider the one loss is to a ranked opponent. So I think this is the basketball team that's probably going to end up doing more this season, and that's a rarity to say. But let's keep in mind that Wes Moore is probably the best guy you could have at the helm at this school right now, and he's got the other contract extension that's a big one. He's doing something with this women's basketball team for the first time since Kay Yao was the coach, and there's something to be said for that. And I know Wes Moore was on Yao's staff for a little while, and he knows what NC State women's basketball is about. There's a lot of pride in this program and in this school's history at the women's level. I like this team. I like their effort. I like the way they're coached, and I do think they're going to be able to do something.
Well, they have a big test tomorrow night. They are in Nebraska taking on the Cornhuskers in the ACC Big Ten Challenge right now. Nebraska not in the top 25 but receiving votes, so certainly a quality opponent for the Wolfpack. This is where our What's the Word segment is going to come in, and this is looking more back at what NC State has done rather than looking forward at this game against Nebraska. What is that one thing that has led to this NC State success?
You know, it's tough to say because they really haven't shot particularly well. I look down the stretch, and I think it's defense. And it's really that simple. because women's basketball is notorious for not having excellent shooters. And that means if you're playing good, sound defense and forcing difficult shots, you're probably going to find yourself in a lot of basketball games. That means you've got to be tight on if you're playing man. You've got to be quick if you're playing zone. If you're running any sort of trap defense, you've got to be able to force the turnover that you need to have. No free shots for NC State. It all comes down to playing a good, solid defensive matchup. And if you can go back, again, as long as NC State's shooting decently from the field, they don't have to be a great shooting team. As long as they're shooting decently, they're going to find themselves competitive in this basketball game, and I think the defense might be able to steal one here.
Mine is going to be chemistry. You look at this team right now, they played 7 games, won 6, 85 assists in 7 games. That's over 10 assists a game. Great passing, great movement. That only comes with chemistry. And another thing, just going to throw this in there, coaching. You talked about it a little bit. Wes Moore is an excellent coach, and as you said, probably the perfect guy to be here in Raleigh with this Lady Wolfpack team. So I'm gonna say 2 words. I'm gonna cheat a little bit. I'll throw a word in there for Ben.
Yeah.
Throw it in there for Ben. Ben's is coaching. Mine is chemistry. But there is one team that I think we could actually say is doing a little bit better right now than the NC State women's basketball team. That is the hockey team. 14-1, 9-0 in conference, and they just continue to roll. But they got a big one this weekend, Virginia Tech. That's a ranked opponent that's actually ranked ahead of them right now in the Southeast region.
They're ranked ahead of them in the ACHA website poll. My Hockey Rankings has NC State at 13 and Virginia Tech at 15. Regardless of which statistic you want to go off of, the fact of the matter is this is the single largest ranked matchup in NC State hockey history. You're looking at 2 top 15 teams that are coming to Raleigh to tango, and this is going to be an absolute barn burner of a matchup. Virginia Tech is not going to forget that NC State just beat them in their barn back in October, and they beat them 4-3, close game. A lot of resiliency on that Tech team. You look at Brendan Hoey, who hasn't seen a whole lot of playing time for the Hokies. Fact stands, he's coming back to his hometown, and he plays well here. You look at Felipe Rodriguez, who is their natural-born scorer. It's going to be very difficult to stop him. Comes down to the goaltending. It's going to be Joey Hall in net once again. I would imagine Hall's going to have to play big, as he did in Roanoke. You've got to look at your top line, Bieberdorf, Banashevitz, and Jimenez. They're going to have to be able to score the puck well, move it like they did in Roanoke. But I don't think that's going to be enough. I think this is going to have to be a full team effort. I think you're going to have to stay disciplined, stay out of the penalty box, as once again you have the wild card of Raleigh officiating, which has been notorious for being poor on all levels. NC State does, I think, have the advantage in this game. It is the Olympic-size ice. It's not an NHL-size rink where NC State was able to beat Virginia Tech. They've got a lot of room to work. You're going to want to use your space and use it to your advantage. NC State is the faster team as a team. I think Virginia Tech has a couple of individual faster players, such as Rodriguez, that you got to be careful about. But if NC State's able to wear down the Virginia Tech Hokies at home, I think they're going to be the ones able to pull across this victory.
Yeah, and the thing that I go back to, and you talked about it a little bit, is big ice. NC State at home on an Olympic-sized ice is a very hard team to beat. That's why you see they haven't lost a home game yet. They're very, very good at home. They've already beaten Virginia Tech. I think that plays in favor of the Hokies, but I think on a bigger ice, NC State really shouldn't have much of a problem. I think with this being their last game of the semester, I think they'll end the semester 15-1 with that 9-0 conference record. But there is something else on the line for them that makes this a very important game. It's a chance to go to regionals in the ACHA postseason. What do they need to do to get there? Because they need to get up into that top 10 if they really want to guarantee them that spot.
Win. I mean, that's the one-word answer. You got to win. You got to win this hockey game, I think, because this is your last real shot to play and get another quality win against a ranked opponent and an opponent that plays in the MACH, which is right now the dominant conference in collegiate hockey at this level in the Southeast. To keep this in mind, ACHA regionals, if you're one of the top 2 ACHA officially ranked seeds, you're automatically going to nationals. You don't even have to play in the regional tournament. What NC State has to do is make the top 10. And where in former days there was an automatic bid per conference, that's not necessarily the case anymore. NC State could be a wild card. They could hop a couple teams, but they're gonna finish somewhere in 8 to 10 just because of their strength of schedule naturally, which is why I think it comes down to winning this game. But not only that, I almost think NC State has to do the unthinkable, the plausible, but you don't want to say anything about it. I think they've got to win out. You look, their only other non-conference game remaining is University of North Carolina at Wilmington, whom they lost to. And NC State has not lost to the Seahawks at home in quite some time. So that plays to their advantage. This, of course, is a big game against Virginia Tech. And then it all comes down to playing in conference and being able to win outright in the regular season and win outright in the tournament. And then you can look at the rankings, because I think it's very hard for any ranking official to keep a one-loss team out of regionals. If NC State's able to do that, there may be a little bit of an extended hockey season here in Raleigh, and it's only going to come from the NC State Wolfpack, because the Hurricanes aren't going to do it. Sure.
I think I'm going to have to agree with that statement right there. Hurricanes aren't going to be the team to do it. Well, that's all the time we have for sports tonight, but as always, we have our shout-outs. I'm going to start out by giving a shout-out to Ben. Keep up the hard work, bud. We miss you, but we know you got a lot of schoolwork to do. So I'll start out with that. Throw it to you. Who do you have for us tonight?
I'm going to go with the other guy in the studio, because what a lot of people don't know is that we are being filmed right now in conjunction with Wolfpack Sports Television. 88.1 WKNC Raleigh continues to team up with the great guys over there in the West Dunn building. Hockey radio broadcast played over the waves here. There'll be another one against Virginia Tech. That'll be on the radio as well as television. But Logan Sims is our technical producer right here in studio. We appreciate all the work he does. Tremendous young media personnel as technical producer and an on-air personality. Check out his show. That is Wolfpack Now on the Wolfpack Sports TV YouTube page. And don't forget to visit us over at Wolfpack Sports Television, bringing you into the pack. So big shout out to Logan over there. Good work, bud.
All right, my Wolfpack shout-out will actually go to Ashley Eli, the NC State women's basketball forward. She has been accepted as a 2016 All-State Women's Basketball Coaches Association Good Works Team. Long name, but that she has been named as a candidate for that team. And the way that works, sports information directors and basketball coaches around the country nominate players who accept exceptional leadership skills and unwavering commitment to volunteerism. So they select those nominees. From those nominees, they will vote and pick two 10-member teams of 5 student-athletes from NCAA Division I and then 5 from Division II, III, and the NAIA. So the final roster will have 20 recipients. She's got a shot at that. That will come out in February, and we'll keep an eye out for that. Keep doing the Wolfpack proud.
And my Wolfpack Sports shout-out is going to go to our first team football All-ACC squad members. That would be Jalen Samuels and Joe Tooney. Great work by both of those guys. Samuels really had a coming-out year. He played excellent at whatever position they lined him up at. Joe Tooney, one of the least penalized offensive linemen in all the nation. So you most certainly have to appreciate the hard work he's done. Great job to both those guys, and another winning season for Wolfpack football.
Well, that's all we have for tonight. We will be back one more time at the end of the semester next week. Hope to hear from you then. Until then, go Pack.